Hello everyone, and welcome to our International Women's Day webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Mizzi, and I'm one of the Partnership Development Directors here at Natural Hazards Research Australia, and I'm so excited to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for your time. We have a stellar all-female cast lined up for you today, as well as people helping out at the back end, so thank you so much to everyone who's been involved in getting this event up and running. I'd first like to start by acknowledging that we are meeting across a range of different First Nations lands today. Indeed, we're all guests on First Nations lands that we're meeting on, and I, in particular, am joining from the Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation. We must pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and we do recognise that the lands and the waters have always been places of teaching and research and learning, and we should always remember that sovereignty has not been ceded. We greatly appreciate the time and expertise of our panel members that they're providing to this session today. And we also acknowledge that there could have actually been greater cultural diversity on our panel. And we know that the intersectionality of race and gender and cultural factors really do compound to create an even greater equality in a lot of cases. And whilst the number of women in academia is increasing, unfortunately, the number of First Nations women and indeed women of other cultural backgrounds is still poorly represented. And the access and availability of culturally diverse women in natural hazards and resilience science is most likely one of the several challenges that we'll be talking about today. And in fact, today we will be talking about gender issues and really want to inspire bigger thinking and changes in the natural hazards resilience sector. But it is possible that due to the sensitive nature of this topic that some might feel distressed or triggered. And if that is the case, we really do encourage you to seek help formally or engage with a trusted friend or colleague in your network. International Women's Day is a very important day to mark the ongoing struggle for gender equity. And indeed, this is the theme for International Women's Day this year, embracing equity, recognising that equality alone, it's just not going to get us there. And we really do need to be doing more to ensure that women aren't discriminated against, but more importantly, are supported to have the roles that they want to hold in this particular sector. Today, you'll be hearing from 5 leading women in the natural hazards and resilience research space. So I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Margaret Moreton, who is the Executive Director of the Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience. We also have Professor Cheryl Desha, who's the Director of N79 Project and Digital Earth and Resilient Infrastructure Research Theme Leader at the Cities Research Institute at Griffith University. We also have Dr. Kate Brady, who's a technical advisor of disaster recovery at the Australian Red Cross and also a recovery research fellow at the University of Melbourne. We also have with us Dr. Phillipa McCormack, who's a postdoc research fellow and law at the University of Adelaide and also one of the Centre's early career research fellows. And last but certainly not least, we'd like to welcome Erin Pally, who is the National Recovery Lead at the Australian Red Cross. Welcome and thank you so much to all our panelists for today. The panel session will be co-facilitated by myself and also my colleague who's one of our node research managers, Loriana Bethune. Audience, I'd really encourage you to engage with us in this discussion. You can ask questions using the Q&A function that you'll see on your screen, and we promise we'll try to get to as many of the questions as we possibly can. Please don't include any specific details of people or organisations where possible. We really do want to keep this conversation as high level as we can. Please vote for the questions that you'd like the panellists to answer. And we hope that you've all had an opportunity to watch the documentary Picture a Scientist that will broadly guide the discussion that we'll be having over the next little while. If you haven't, that's okay. The documentary will still be available for you to look at until close of business Friday, the 10th of March, using the link in your registration confirmation email. Without further ado, let's get started with our panel session, and I'm going to kick off with a question to Margaret. So Margaret, welcome and thank you so much for your time today. I'd like to ask you to consider what are some of the barriers to career progression that you have faced within this particular sector and how you've navigated these previously.
Thank you, and thanks for including me in the panel. Hello, everybody. Do you know, I watched the film earlier this week, and it really brought back to me some of the barriers I have faced through examples I'd kind of pushed aside in my memory. So I've been around a while. For some of you who don't know me, you can probably tell by looking at me. I'm most likely the oldest panel member. And I remembered a Christmas party that I attended for an organisation I'd just joined 30 or thereabouts years ago. And unbeknownst to me, they had a practice at the Christmas party of throwing the new women into the pool. Not the new men, just the new women. And not with any warning, I wore a dress that day. And I ended up in the pool, and I tried a number of strategies to stop this from happening once I knew that's the intent, and I failed. And into the pool, two of us went. And everyone else around the pool thought it was hilarious. I approached the managing director after that event and said, "Excuse me, what the hell?" And he said, "Get over it. It's part of welcoming you on board. You should see it as a plus." So I'd like to say things have changed since then, and I haven't been thrown in the pool recently. But I think one of the barriers is some kind of, I decided this morning I'd be antsy in today's presentation, completely professional, but a little bit antsy. One of the barriers is arrogance and an assumption that if you want to be in our world, then you just got to take it on the chin and be one of us. And I saw that unfold in the film. If you haven't watched the film, any participants, I recommend you watch it, possibly not just before bed, because you'll want to go for a walk afterwards and swear at something. Yeah, barriers like arrogance. And I had another reaction to the film. Another barrier is niceness. I was raised to be polite and courteous, and I think most people more or less are. I actually got angry at the very nice colleague, male, of one of the scientists in the film, who said he thought she handled it really well, and so he didn't need to do anything. How dare he? So, bystander kind of passivity, arrogance. I think I should stop. They're my first two goes at a couple of barriers.
Mm-hmm. What a good conversation starter. Thank you, Margaret. I'm going to throw to someone else on the panel. There's been a lot of nodding. Cheryl, how does that resonate with you in your experiences?
Not a being thrown in the pool, but a very recent example. And it's around, I'm in the academic sector. So it was around being asked by a distant colleague to take on an extra load elsewhere in the university, and having that not remunerated. And I know that paid for, and I know that other colleagues doing extra load would have it paid for. And it turned out that it wasn't really a necessarily a male-female thing. I think that the way that it came across was, "Cheryl, you're very competent. You can do this, and we really love you doing it. And thank you so much." And I think that was then subsequently resolved. So I'm, grateful for current workplace, because I think it was one of those unconscious bias things that our colleagues have, and I probably have done that myself in other contexts. But it was pointed because it was, for me, the mental load that women carry and the extra load that we often carry. And because we're good at it, we get to ask to do it more. And I really had to stop and think, no, that's not okay. I'm not taking on extra work at same level of remuneration, because that impacts on my family and my young kids and the time I don't get to spend with them. So I was nodding because the comment of, you should see it as a plus resonated with me. You should see it as a bonus that you've been asked to do this thing and take it on because you look good. It's like, actually, I don't know about looking good, but it doesn't make me feel good. So I think that was my reflection there.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I'm going to hand over to Phillipa as well, being an earlier career researcher in this space as well. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on some of those reflections so far as well.
Thanks, Sarah. I think one of the things that just really struck me at one point, one of the researchers just after that unconscious bias kind of experiment that they did, so the feeling that you get is just one of utter despair. And I feel that really deeply. I found it really hard to watch. I cried a lot through it. Part of that is because my younger sister is an Antarctic researcher and has summered in Antarctica a few times and has come home with just the most horrendous stories. And they are similar to stories of mates that work in the mining sector out in the desert. You know, there's that remoteness thing at play, and it's devastating and horrendous. And it's 2023. And I just, like all of my working life, have been struck by the fact that, like, it's the 2020s. My granny, you know, talked about this stuff and it's still happening. It's crazy. And just from my own sort of personal experience, I'm enormously privileged, you know. I have benefited enormously from the way that you, Margaret, and others on the panel and others in my life have pushed through some of these really horrendous things. And I expect my experience is enormously improved because of that. But I started out as a commercial lawyer, and in my first week, we had a panel session about working women and what it's like to work as a woman in a commercial law firm. And one of the partners got up and she said, here's the thing, you know, people will put this to you in different ways, but the truth of it is you got 4 burners. If you want to be good at your job, you've got to turn off 1. If you want to be good, like really excellent at your job, you've got to turn off 2. And the burners represent family, work, friends, and hobbies or something. And she's like, and you just turn off your friends and your hobbies and you'll get through this okay. And if you want to have kids, get a nanny. Hopefully you've got a supportive partner. The most important thing is that, like, for the first half of your career, you just never say no to anything, because that's how you get ahead. And I was like, that sounds horrible. I just don't want to be that person if that's really what it takes, you know. So I think probably the biggest barrier that I have experienced in my career is how on earth you choose when and how and to whom to say no. I can't do that. I won't do that. I really want to, but I shouldn't. You know, how to map out your year and recognise the unmissable opportunities, the nice opportunities, and then the things that you're really allowed to just say no to and not fail as a result. And I'm only just starting to get better at that, but I'm still not good. And I feel that is a gendered thing very much, because I look around at the committees I'm on and all of the ones that are unremunerated are either exclusively women volunteering their time, or they are predominantly women. None of them are half-half, and that's extraordinary to me. And I think I'm still doing it wrong. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Phillipa. I mean, I so agree with you with your first point. I had such a visceral response to this film. I was crying, my heart was racing when some of the experiences, some of the women were describing their experiences. I just really felt that, because I had experienced it myself, and I had friends in the industry and friends outside in other industries that have experienced these kind of issues, and even now. So this is not something that we can just put behind us. This is something we need to actually put in front of us to be like, we need to actually deal with this. So yes, I completely agree with you on your first point. And on your second, I think that kind of takes us into the next question that we really wanted to explore. Was the film, you know, was very specific in talking about the iceberg. So we have those very obvious issues that people are experiencing, and everyone can agree, obviously, that sexual assault and the kind of abuse that the 2 key researchers that we're describing is wrong. But what are those unseen barriers that people are experiencing within their workplaces, and also potentially in their lives as well, just in general? Kate, I know you and I have had some discussions about this in the past. Yeah, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I'd love to. I also had a very strong reaction to watching the documentary. I watched it before I went to bed. So take Margaret's advice. That was not a smart thing to do. I was also yelling at the colleague who was sort of describing how helpful he was while being so spectacularly tone deaf. And when I was looking at that idea of the iceberg, I thought, oh, it's pretty interesting looking at that, because I have experienced sexual harassment in my roles in the sector, not as an, well, actually, I was going to say not as an academic. That's not true. I got one 2 weeks ago. And it has been a combination of in-person stuff, but online has been more mine, where particularly if I speak at a conference, I speak at a lot of conferences, having a lot of experiences of people making fake accounts and then having things to say to me about, you know, sort of unwanted sexually explicit things. I have also had an experience in the not so distant future of being offered the exact same role as a male colleague and being offered the role for less money, and that being an issue that took a long time to resolve. So they would be the top of the iceberg thing. So I have experienced those, but what I would say, I have found none of that anywhere near as difficult as trying to deal with the unspoken and the structural stuff. So I said one of the things that I wanted to talk about as being part of this panel was the motherhood penalty. So a lot of the stuff that I've really experienced, I think, has happened, the structural stuff I've experienced has happened since I've become a mother. And I have like way too many kids, as a lot of people know, have a lot of them. But one of the things that I have really identified is that idea of the part-time role, and that this in and of itself is not a gendered issue, whether or not you go part-time, except that we know that the vast majority of part-timers are women, and the vast majority of women who go part-time because of caring roles. And I was looking at the numbers last week in preparation for this, and the estimates, the financial estimates for last financial year in Australia, was that if we had to pay for the unpaid care work that happens in Australia annually, last year it was put at $80 billion, like billion with a B. And to put that in context, the aged care pension costs us $50 billion as a country per year. So it's like absolutely phenomenal. So it is, and almost all of that work is done by women, and that's care for children, care for older people, care for people with disabilities. And so this is absolutely a gendered issue, and it means things like you go part-time because you know you possibly can't have the 4 burners that Phillipa was talking about on. I struggle with 2 burners, you know, and that's why sort of taking the part-time thing. But once you hit part-time, you have this thing where everything you do, that's, you know, the battle hymn of the part-time worker is that everything that I do that you do costs me more. So I come to a 1-day workshop as a 3-day-a-week worker. It costs me 33% of my week. It costs the full-time worker 20% of their week. And if you add all that up, you start to see the structural differences that you get constantly penalized for. So things like, you know, we know during COVID lockdowns, men publishing rates went up in academia. We know universally women's rates went down. So that's not just a woman mishandling her workload or finding it hard to take care of. This is a systemic issue. And so I find it really strange, and was reflecting on that last night when I was watching the documentary. I was a bit disappointed that that idea of caring responsibilities wasn't brought into the documentary. And I think part of that might be a cultural difference between Americans and Australians because of the lack of maternity leave and part-time work available to a lot of our US colleagues. But I find it interesting that I found the top of the iceberg stuff, which is horrific, so much easier than the bottom of the iceberg stuff, because like the bottom of the iceberg stuff, you feel like it's a you problem. You feel like you're going a bit mad. You're just not managing it very well. Am I going crazy because when they said that, I interpreted it as this, but maybe they didn't really mean it. The top of the iceberg stuff is just awful behavior that you can call out. So it's, and I think that, like, I'm a cisgendered hetero white woman who's not a single mother. If I find this hard, oh my gosh, like, what's happening for everyone else?
Yeah, I can't agree with you more, Kate. Like, I think Annabelle Crabb discusses this issue really in a very it interrogates it in The Wife Drought, and then she did a quarterly essay following that up. And I highly recommend people to have a read of that. It's really helps highlight that issue about what exactly women are doing and how much work they are doing. And like, I guess if you were thinking about it in terms of like, if I was at work and I was doing 1.5 jobs, or 2 jobs whilst my colleague was doing 1 job, and how would I feel about that? How would I feel? But that tends to happen. That seems to be what's happening in partnerships these days. It's, and yeah, so it's really worth respecting and discussing. I think Margaret, you've got something you would like to add to this.
It's a confession, really, because it's a bad joke. And as soon as I started to say it regularly, I had to stop saying it all because I know it's an inappropriate joke. I used to say at different times in my career, what I need is a good wife, because I was single for chunks of my career and am single now. And when I had kids, Kate, I get it. I'd say what I need, and the guys would laugh. And then I go, right, I can't say that anymore. What I need is a good wife, and I want a traditional one who has dinner ready and the kids bathed. So all I do is walk in and read a story, and then the kids go to bed. That's what I need. And they'd go, yeah, that's terrific. That's what I've got.
But that's what you will also be congratulated for, Margaret, for reading the story. How amazing.
Yeah.
Like, my brother and I talk about this all the time. He works for the MFB in New South Wales. And he asked me when he had his first son, do you think it's weird that people congratulate you to go to the supermarket, but like they expect you to do like really complicated things at work? And I said, I've never been congratulated to go to the supermarket. He goes, I take him to the supermarket and I'll have at least 3 people tell me what an amazing job I'm doing every single time. And I think that's weird that you're congratulating me for going to the supermarket with a kid who's my kid, but at work you would like me to be able to perform really complex tasks. And I was like, welcome to the work. And like,
how wonderful that he's had that experience all of a sudden.
That's right. I think what do you think, Loriana? Should we throw to Cheryl, and then I'd love to actually ask a question of Erin. What do we think?
Yes, yeah.
Awesome.
That was
Cheryl, keen to know your thoughts, and Erin, stand by.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's a reflection I'm having as I'm listening around the mental load conversation. I hear that it's somewhat genetic and a lot nurtured as well in our propensity to carry load. My background's half Indian, half Welsh. On both sides, I'm doomed from my parents' influence as a child in servitude and people pleasing. So that's been a lot of growing up for me as a human being, but I think also as a female. I was born in Mauritius, immigrated to Australia. So, immigrant, growing up in Mackay, dealing with a lot of those cultural and gendered overtones. I think what I'm sitting with here is around the mental load that natural hazards research actually brings on, and it's not spoken about. And I feel like I'm going crazy, and I'm not a frontline responder. I'm at least 2 or 3 steps back in the research side, holding space for decision makers to think through really complicated things. And as they do that, and as they share the context, carrying that mental load, I wonder as a female whether I carry it differently to my male counterparts. I certainly find that it does influence my non-work lifestyle as well, in terms of the way that I approach risk and risk management. And I'm just sitting with that at the moment because I think it's under the iceberg. And in our particular sector, I wonder whether there's an opportunity for females who are carrying those kinds of responsibilities to share about it in a yarning way that helps us let go of that load, whether we're frontline in Red Cross and other government organisations and responders, or whether we're back from the front line but still interacting with it, because the mental fatigue and physical fatigue this decade is not something we have had before, with the increasing and extent of the disasters that we're facing. So I'm just really cognizant of that here as a gendered conversation, as well as being a sector conversation.
And further to what you were saying, Cheryl, something that resonated with me in seeing the documentaries, one of the researchers said, look, all I want to do is be a good scientist and for good science to be done. So with all of what we've spoken about today, Erin, a question I'm really keen to unpack with you is, in your role at Red Cross, you're absolutely a consumer and advocate for research. How do you think some of these issues and kind of the unequal gender biases that we're seeing, how do you think that's playing out in terms of the research that we're actually conducting in the natural hazards resilience space? I'm keen to know your thoughts on that.
Thank you. And I suppose I'm sitting here listening to you all, and I haven't been thrown into a pool. I haven't got kids yet, so I'm at a stage in my career where, you know, I'm taking every opportunity I can and saying yes to things. And then kind of Kate and I yesterday were talking about how to say no and how important it is. But I also see, you know, in disaster recovery, you know, half of the people impacted by disasters are women, and women identifying, and their kids. And a big part of the recovery industry is worked on by women. And I suppose as consuming you know, consuming research to be able to implement good programming, when that research is being influenced or who decided on, and funding decided on by people who have blind spots, it means that we can't target the most marginalized people in our communities. So, and then when you're talking about having too many kids, Kate, have as many kids as you want. But, you know, then if you're producing really in-depth research and things like that, and people are going home and they haven't slept because they got a baby in the other room, or they're just slept really badly, or they're doing 1.5 jobs, as Cheryl was talking about, or they've just been thrown in the pool, as Margaret said. How do you focus then on getting through all the research and you know, articulate it in a way that you can use for communities, that can speak to communities in a way that they can understand and grapple with? That's kind of, but I also feel like in a lot of ways I've been really lucky that you all in this room, virtual room, have paved the way to make it a lot easier for me, and I'm so glad I haven't been thrown in a pool, so thank you.
Thanks, Erin. And Phillipa, I think I saw a hand pop up there.
Sorry, I did. I just wanted to jump in, and I know that this is not the case for everyone on the panel, but one of the really complicated, sort of exacerbating factors, I think, with the university sector now, is that there's this crushing weight of teaching and admin on academic employees. And I went through, in a previous institution, I went through kind of a really toxic institutional collapse situation, and we had 15 early career researchers. We were all women. We used to do this ladies who lunch thing where we just like chat and support each other. And in a 2-year period, every single one of us either lost our jobs or had our contracts not renewed. And now there's this huge gap in the middle in that institution, and it's devastating to have seen. But I completely burnt out. I was teaching 6 units, trying to do good research, raise a child, you know, reach out, network, do all the things. And I just found myself one day sitting under my desk, and I was just sobbing, and I was like, I can't do this. I'm so bad at academia. Do you know, I can't think anymore or sleep. I'm devastated by this whole kind of process. And a very generous, more senior colleague kind of pulled me out. And the next day I had a phone call and was invited to apply for this position that I've got now. And it's a complete unicorn. Like, I'm 100% research, but it's a pretty significant demotion. And I just grabbed it with both my hands. I need space to breathe and think, you know, and it has occurred to me, like, I am so much more creative now than I was when I was teaching 6 units, as well as trying to do half of my time on research and all of the admin and the committees and the stuff that I was doing alongside it. And it seems to me that the natural hazards sector needs people with headspace to think really creatively, to engage really actively, to sit together, to talk about what we're learning, what might work, what might change, what might fix things, what might help, And at the same time, the people who are supposed to be leading that kind of educational and research space are just under all of this intense pressure to bring in money, to teach, to churn people through. And it's not entirely gendered, but the most precarious aspects of our workforce are majority women, you know, and that's that plays out in really complicated ways. So I just kind of wanted to add that to the conversation because I think it impacts on our capacity to do good research and to support those frontline folks. And that's a terrible shame. We're missing, you know, a whole lot of really great work.
Thanks so much, Phillipa. I mean, in general, are you hopeful for the future? What are you thinking in terms of? I think we can ask this question of both the academic sector and also of the emergency management sector. Are things changing for the better? You know, are we? Is there a focus on equity and diversity that's allowing and programs you're seeing that are changing things for the better, or are we stagnant? How are you feeling?
I'm a junior academic who studies climate adaptation, bushfires, and biodiversity law. And everything about the world I research is falling apart. Do you know? I see the academic sector continuing to decline. I feel hopeful that my work matters, and that's really profoundly important.
Yep.
And I see my daughter and we have conversations, and I'm part of a Curious Climate schools program in Tasmania, sort of one of the side things that I do. And I am hopeful about that because kids are asking questions about what climate change means for them. And I am one of, you know, hundreds of people who can feed answers to those children. And there's another generation who really want to see things change. I feel hopeful about that. I am grieving the loss of academia in its most creative and productive form. I don't know what that looks like in the future and whether we can get something sensible back. Academia is not a good employer. Like, no universities are smashing this. They're smashing us. They're not really doing a great job at this research space to solve big problems. And some people do it better than others. And if you're the head of a lab and you're bringing in huge amounts of money, maybe that's really amazing, but early career researchers don't do that. Actually, just one very brief reflection, and then maybe it won't be my turn again for the rest of the talk because I'm super sorry, I'm just chatting on. But I was reflecting on the fact that I've been mentored by an extraordinary group of women. I have 2 or 3 women kind of in my network who've led me through, and I've followed them and they've given me opportunities and lifted me up and taught me well. And I'm starting to recognize now, actually, that's super rare. And so I feel really privileged for that. And in the lead up to watching the documentary, I was like, no, I haven't had it as bad. But then I was like, actually, as I watched this documentary, I was like, no, that's just the good version of the same problem. That is one person as the gatekeeper for funding, for publications, for an apprenticeship in academia. It's just the good side of a really broken coin. And what we need actually is much broader. We need a muddled space so we can all be doing things together and not just one person at the pinnacle of this hierarchy who chooses who gets in and who doesn't.
And Phillipa, reflecting on your commentary just then, and you started to talk a little bit about the role that mentors have played in your career. I'd really like to open this up to the panel to unpack and get an understanding of what you've all done in your careers today to support and facilitate women in science, to play more of an active role, to have more leadership positions, anything and everything we'd be really keen to know about. And a couple of questions from our audience have alluded to that. So I am going to, I'm going to start off with Margaret for this one. Margaret.
I think mentoring is such a valuable opportunity in both directions. So I've been mentored and I am mentoring someone now, a woman. I think mentors, you know, when I did my PhD in disaster resilience, I had a female head supervisor and she was fantastic. And when I felt down or had struggles, often with men, as part of the research process, she'd read me the riot act if I felt sorry for myself and say, we've got to change the world and we're starting with you. So it was great to have strong women throughout my career. I can think of numbers of them now as I think of different roles I've had where strong women said, don't give up. We have to keep doing this. There are women behind us. There are women who went ahead of us. We've got to keep fighting the fight. You know, at some point, we're just going to blow up the world. But I'm joking. All participants, don't panic. Yeah, you know, you sort of get crabby. I now know why a lot of older women, including my 93-year-old mother, are a bit cranky. Seriously, let's not be having this conversation in 10 more years with another set of people. This is an appalling situation, but we keep on going, don't we? So yeah, mentoring others is a really good thing. I find also that there's something that happens in a group that doesn't happen in a pair. So I have throughout my career found like-minded women, and I'm in the process of finding a new set of like-minded women, because we share, we don't feel so alone. It's good and bad in that we all go, yeah, we all nod, like we've all been nodding when anyone speaks, doesn't matter whose mouth is moving, everyone's nodding, going, yep, I've got examples of that. So, you know, finding like-minded women. I'm really conscious, and I had a peek at the chat, I'm really conscious that I too, I forget which one of you said this, I too feel actually like a privileged white woman. I have a well-paid job, you know, I have a home of my own, well, you know, me and the bank. There are a lot of people who don't have the advantages that I have, and there are a lot of women who don't have the advantages that I have. And that's one of the things that drives me to try to lift other women up.
Talking about that, we've got a question here from one of our attendees that's asking your thoughts on how to best provide women of colour with the seat at the table in the sector, and also, I guess, in academia as well. Anyone want to field that?
Oh, I'll have a crack.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Bearing in mind, I'm half Welsh, so I'm, you know, is this appropriate or not? I feel like a vice versa. I'm kind of, you know, a mixture, a blend. People ask me vice versa, if you don't know, is those chocolates that are brown on the outside and blonde in you know, vanilla inside. Anyway, one of those inappropriate jokes that I've told myself in the past, which has worked for me at that point. Now I just say I'm from planet Earth, and our genetics are so similar, and it happens to be that a little bit of melanin makes a big difference in the way that we look, and a little bit of bone structure makes a big difference in the way that we look. But so practical comment in terms of being a minority group of any persuasion, being at the table, is to be at the table. And that's what a number of mentors have said to me in the past. So never mind what the situation is, if you're at the table, you get to have a say. So do what you need to do to get to the table. So that for me is about two things for me in academia, and find yourself mentors who will do this for you. Multi-author, multiple chief investigators, and push for that like you've pushed for nothing else. Multiple authors, there's so much evidence these days to say that that carries, you know, more than enough weight for academic situations. So be anywhere in that author list, but be in it, and advocate for yourself for that. If you contribute, be in it and ask to contribute. And I think writing and researching the way we look matters less, perhaps, because these days in particular, it's taken a step back in terms of our appearance, where we are and what we do. I think the other thing for me, though, is actually I'm realizing right now, and we're in a sector that sees risks a lot. Democracy is a fragile thing. And globally, we have half a dozen well-functioning-ish democracies. And equity and inclusivity and diversity are very fragile things. And humanity is pretty dumb as a species. Like, we just keep forgetting. And you look back over, not the last 100 or 200 years, the last 2000, you know, add an extra zero, history repeats. So we're in a time at the moment of huge flux and huge uncertainty around stability. And this decade is going to be really, really ordinary, which I'm not depressed about, but I'm pragmatically quite stoic about. So, you know, having a stoic mindset, if you're a minority group, I think will hold you well for your mental well-being. And actually, called Benestar. You know, one of those things we generally have those organisations, if we're employed by someone, give. On my Benestar call several years ago when I was really struggling, the share was around this term called stoicism or stoic happiness, and it's around being okay with where things are at and then feeling a sense of optimism and confidence about being able to do something about it. So whether it's gender or persuasion or attitude or values, I think that applies. So an answer, no, not in 5 minutes, but hopefully that's helpful.
Kate, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to add that so Blythe from NHRA and I were talking about this earlier this morning around this idea that it's sort of like the idea of designing sustainable, accessible cities, you know, which is a concept that many of us in this space are are aware of. If you can design a city for the person who is going to have the most access issues, then you are designing it for everybody. And so if we are designing, for example, research systems or funding systems that are targeting the people who are going to find it the hardest by asking them what are the biggest barriers that you're facing, and then making systematic changes. So that is, you know, people who are experiencing discrimination at intersection points or multiple intersection points, you know, gender, race, sexuality, ableism, whatever it is, being able to identify people who are struggling structurally the hardest. If we design systems for the people who are going to face the most barriers, everyone will benefit. Like, so going the opposite to the way that we're currently going. And so that, I mean, and for that, those people have to be the people advising to say, here are the biggest barriers, here are the things that make the biggest difference. So
and building on what you've said, Kate, Erin, I'm really keen to know your thoughts on you know, you work for Red Cross, one of the largest non-for-profits in the country. If you were head of the Red Cross, what is something, or what sorts of things would you like to put in place, implement to better support women in our field?
So sort of, as everyone's been talking, I've been thinking of 2 projects that I've either benefited from or been part of creating that I think have really benefited me and people around me. So I was part of a women's leadership program last year that gave me access to knowledge about leadership. It helped articulate some of the things I was experiencing in my new role as a manager. Networks, I was given an exec sponsor, mentoring opportunities, a network within the Red Cross. So I learned the huge breadth of stuff that people do. And that was just really good for my own confidence, but access to the networks as well. And then as part of the disaster recovery program, we a couple of years ago put in identified roles. So people of First Nations communities were specifically hired, and some of the feedback we got from them was that we need to get together to be able to share and support each other and guide each other as First Nations people in Red Cross. And seeing everybody get together, it helped them, that peer support side of things, but then it also created a voice within the organization so that it's not one person going it alone. It's people getting together, sharing experiences, and then creating change. And that's, I think, takes courage and start somewhere and then learn, and being willing to learn, be willing to give it a go and listen, and just becoming, organizations as a whole need to become better at listening and listening to the people that they're best trying to serve or support and walk alongside them.
Thanks, Erin. And building on what Erin has already shared with us, Margaret is Executive Director of ADA. I'm keen to know your thoughts on, you know, what more that we could do in leadership positions to support other women to play really important roles that they want to do in their career. And it could be as a formal leader or not. I think that's an important part of the topic we haven't really touched on yet. It's not just about women being CEOs and exec directors and sitting on boards. It's a part of it, but it's not everything. Margaret, what are your thoughts on that?
So many, we need another seminar.
Yes.
You know, I really believe in the you can't be what you can't see. And so as many of us as possible need to get into roles that we love. I'm really sorry you had to take a demotion, Phillipa, to get into a role that fulfills that. That sucks. Technical term. You know, we need to do more and more about getting into roles we love and living the lives we want to live, and trying to, we don't have to boast or big note or any of that stuff, but just enjoy being who we are and what we bring so that other young women can see us. I want more women of colour. I want more Indigenous women. If I can find ways to lift people back into the workforce, or through the work that I do here in ADA or in any other way, you know, I'm part of the Australian Women in Emergencies Network, and I'm not as active as I was in that network, but it's a great opportunity to meet other women. I've got a website I think you should all have a look at, which is the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. We're doing some work here in ADA and AFAC about gender, and we're not just talking women, but all kinds of gender identities and all kinds of groups that are not represented in our workplace. And how do we, I really agree with the notion of, if we make the workplace attractive to anybody, it benefits everybody. So let's make it more attractive and accessible as a place to be for the people who find it the hardest to be here. Because of the structural, there's so many reasons why. It's because of a whole lot of history and a whole lot of blind spots that we have at the bottom of that. And I probably have them too at the bottom of the iceberg. But I really, you know, I used to work in the Office for Women some time ago. I led it for a while, and we did a lot of work with what is now called this Workplace Gender Equality Agency. And I think it's about really challenging the notion that we do things really well here, because if you play a few games like how many minutes in a meeting do the women speak, and literally how many minutes in a meeting was it a male voice over a female voice, a bit like the size of the office, that exercise that one of the women had to do in the documentary, and she had to literally measure the sizes of the office to demonstrate that the women's offices were smaller. I mean, and even then people say, no, you can't be right, you must have made an error. I'd look at the pay gap. I've worked in organisations where I happened to share my pay level with a male colleague, and he was honest enough to share his. I knew our roles were completely different. I had an extremely busy role. So did he. He said, I'm coasting. But because he was a man, he'd been able to negotiate a much higher rate of pay. You know, check your rates of pay. Check the data. Follow the data. Let's measure things, check things, compare things, and make them hard things, not soft things. Pay rates.
Yep.
Anyway. There are lots of things to do.
There are lots of things to do. And I think what's resonated with what you've said, Margaret, is in all of that, what can we all do to support women to have those conversations? Because personal experience, it can be a confidence thing. So how do we build women up to support them to have those conversations in a safe way, where they feel empowered to raise that with their line managers, their directors, their peers, their colleagues, their mentors, because I'm not entirely sure that that happens as often as we'd like it to happen. Phillipa.
So just really briefly, I see value in training women to have those conversations. But what I would say is that women and all people who are marginalised in our current structures are not just not necessarily leaning into those kinds of conversations, but don't necessarily get given opportunities to have them. And part of the change has got to be structural, and it's got to not be you come to me and tell me what you're worth and why I should give you the same amount of money as the dude. But here is a job. There are 4 people doing it. They all get the same amount of money. And maybe like employers and leaders of research groups go to junior people and say, every time I go for a meeting with the minister, I'm going to take one of you with me, not because you're leading this research project, but because when you're there, your face is there in front of the minister, in front of the agency, in front of the group, and you are part of a team and your face is contributing, like your body, your brain is contributing work to this. So come with me every time I do something really important. And maybe you take one person every time and make sure that that's always covering all of the people who are at the bottom of your organisation and just getting their feet in the door. And the other thing, just from an academic perspective, create little pockets of money. Like getting ARC grants is so freaking hard and you need a track record. So offer $500 grants for junior people. Target them. Like there's 3 for women, there's 3 for, you know, people with disabilities, there's 3 for Indigenous people. We're going to invite you to just apply for little pockets of money right from the get-go and make it really easy to get them. You build a track record and you build a CV, and then you can go and say, I've won 7 of these things, worked with these people. And it just lowers the barriers right at the start so that you get some momentum, because that's so. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Phillipa. And I'd love to think as a National Research Centre, we can have more of these conversations about the role that we can play in some of that as well, not just your big ARCs and NHMRCs, et cetera, et cetera. Cheryl, lots of head nodding from your end as well.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on something that's quite easy and tangible to do that at the time, 7 years ago, I thought was beyond me, but turned out to be one of the best things I've done in my career, which was an informal thing, but it could be formalized as a top down. I think now I'm in a leadership role, I could help with that. It's writing a book club. So we started, I was off my 2nd maternity leave, like grabbing for help. And Elsa Shepherd, who passed away just a few weeks ago, was at QUT at the time. And we had kitchen bench top conversations. And she was like, you know, I tried to start a book club and it didn't work. No one had time. We said, okay, well, let's make an hour and a half every 4th Thursday of the month, ship in pub, we can have beer, wine, coffee, whatever, and focus on a book or 2 books about self-development. And we've read some crappy books and we've read some awesome books, but I hadn't read a single book in 10 years that was for me, apart from what I read for work until that point. I was a bit broken in that respect about personal development. And we've covered 30 books in 7 years, like yay. And, you know, sometimes we read them, sometimes we watch the TED Talk, but the valuable thing is we yarn once a month. And that yarning once a month, we've had our colleagues up, down, anywhere. It's, you know, it's like you just organize it. It's completely informal, same time, same place every month. We've had career changes dealing with bullying, some serious wellbeing, mental load, sharing and offloading. And I just really encourage, if you're here on this call today, it was a Women in Leadership 2-day thing that I went to in Melbourne, and everyone kept putting up these slides of these great books that tell you how to sort your life. And I sat there feeling so broken because I hadn't read any of them, and I knew that I was reinventing the wheel and I couldn't learn from anyone. So that was my personal leadership of self, to do something about it. Vigorously, I'm like, that's something that people can do. That's not a high energy thing that gets you connected.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. That's such a tangible way that we can look after ourselves. We're going to have to wrap up pretty soon. So Margaret, we've got you, and then Kate, I know you have a 5-point action plan that we're all very excited to hear. So we'll finish off with that, and then I'll make some closing remarks. So Margaret.
Thank you, because I know we're out of time. I'll be really fast. I wanted to thank the participants. I've had another little look in the chat. I just wanted to thank you all for coming, and to thank those of you who said thank you for being honest as a panel set, because we could have done a straightforward professional discussion and stayed in our heads, and we didn't. And I want to thank you for thanking us, because it means we know we did okay to do what we did. And for everyone out there, male, female, whatever identity you go by, the answer to a number of your questions is find someone you trust and have a conversation. Have a conversation about how to answer the question you've asked. Just start talking about it. We just need to get louder. Have a conversation. And for the guys who are asking questions, have a conversation with the women around you. They'll help you work out how not to be that nice white guy.
Thanks, Margaret. Kate.
Less an action plan and more of a list of demands. I think it's like really exciting to be able to talk to NHRA because they're an evidence generating organization that believes in an evidence base, and there is evidence base around this stuff. So it's stuff that can be implemented. The first suggestion that I had was putting a clause in funding agreement so that in cases where there is misconduct by a chief investigator, that the funding does not disappear with that person being disciplined. So the example in the documentary was around this guy, Dave Marchant, who was like basically, fired as a result of very long-going systemic sexual misconduct. And there are examples in Australia where this has happened. A university has taken really clear, decisive action, which is really great, but everyone below them loses their job because the funding is tied to the individual rather than to the university. So having a clause where the university would be able to retain the funding and either appoint someone different or develop a team that can still deliver the goods, so that the people, particularly people who are in a position of less power, can report issues without the benefit of that being that they lose their job, like that if justice is served, they lose their job. The second one is with research contracts, assume fractional work for milestones and do an auto calculation on it. So rather than assuming it's a full-time person and that's what the milestone is, ask people to put in what their fractional time is and the milestone automatically calculates. The researcher works half-time, the milestone timeframe doubles. It's pretty easy maths, I would think, if we started from the point, rather than assuming that you have to negotiate in, assume that people are fractional, and if they're full-time, it's great. Please don't put deadlines for funding in school holidays or the week after, because it cuts us out. Because if it's the week after, we've already had to submit before the school holidays to be able to make it work in terms of internal sign-off processes. For the fellowships, and I know this is a super career limiting move for me because I was lucky enough to be given one of the travel fellowships for this year, but I was so excited when the application came out encouraging women and people in caring responsibilities to apply for it, but then nothing changed. And I know there's internal advocacy for this. My partner and I sat down and figured it out. Because of the childcare that I normally provide, it's going to cost us about $3,500 out of pocket for me to go for a 2-week period of time. That wouldn't happen if my partner was going, because he works full-time and I work part-time. So please, any advocacy around that would be awesome. And then the fifth one was around transparent reporting on funding around gender, but also monitoring the leaky pipeline. Where are we losing women in research? So not just enough to say, we funded 10 women. We funded 10 women at what stage in their career compared to where we're funding men in their career, and where are the differences? Where are we losing women and why are we losing them? So that was my list of demands. Thank you.
Well, fantastic. I love it. I've got something to walk away with. Wow, what a fantastic discussion. Thanks to all the panelists for all your honesty and for everything that you've brought today. It was such a great discussion, and yeah, I think that anyone that participated in this will walk away changed. I think when we're thinking about these issues, and I was so interested in looking at everyone on the panel and just seeing just how vibrant and energized people are just talking about this, and so I think we need to obviously continue this this conversation. Part of this this whole panel was recorded, and recordings will be available online soon, and you'll receive an email when that is available. I would encourage everyone to have a think about what this conversation and take note of the salient points, and then how we can follow up and take action. We're also looking at how we can further progress these issues within NHRA, and so we're always open to suggestions and comments from our participants and from our researchers as well. Okay, so we have plenty more events coming up online and in person, which you can find on our website at www.naturalhazards.com.au/events. On Thursday will be our final webinar on the Black Summer research findings, which will cover bushfire prediction and fire behaviour. We're also very excited for our second Natural Hazards Research Forum on the 1st to the 3rd of May in Melbourne. Registrations are now open, and we hope to see many of you there as possible. Our 2023 Disaster Challenge will also launch in March, so keep an eye out for that. So thank you everyone for attending. Apologies that we were over time, but we hope to see you next time. Thank you.